the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. John Lennartz is Vice President, Environment, Energy, and Real Estate for Samuel. He has responsibility for energy management activities for Samuel, which has over 85 sites. He has been involved in energy management projects since 2002. These activities have not only reduced energy consumption and cost, but have resulted in reduced GHG emissions, which not only help achieve Samuel's goals, but those customers that strive to reduce their carbon footprint. In 2016, John petitioned the Association of Energy Engineers, also known as AEE, and established the Hamilton chapter and has served as a chapter president since its inception. In 2017, at the World Energy Engineering Congress, the AEE named John the Energy Engineer of the Year for Canada. Now let's get into the episode with John. Welcome back, Dave and John. I also would like to welcome back our guest this week, John Lennartz, Vice President of Environment, Energy, and Real Estate at Samuel Son & Co. Thank you for joining us again on today's podcast.
Again, thank you for having me.
In our last podcast episode with you, we focused on the plan Samuel has implemented for their energy and carbon plan. Today's episode, we will be discussing a more general outlook on how this can be implemented in a general manufacturing organization. So to start us off, what is the first thing a company should do if they want to manage their energy and carbon?
In my opinion, you really need an executive sponsor. You need somebody at the senior level that believes in the initiative, is going to support it, and is able and willing to remove any of the roadblocks that you might get or encounter while you're trying to establish your program.
John, can you share with us, just to follow up from what you've just stated, can you share some of the challenges that people like our listeners might find if they undertake this process within their organization?
Well, there's always competing priorities. We're talking time, we're talking CapEx. There's this belief that for energy management, it's all about doing projects and spending money. And in some instances, yeah, you do want to spend some CapEx to do a lighting project or, a compressor upgrade or whatnot. But there are so much savings out there in just, doing the little things that is low cost or no cost. And I know that's a cliche, but there really is. And it takes work to make sure that those low cost and no cost items, if we're talking about low hanging fruit, don't grow back. So that always comes to mind. It always seems to be a roadblock. But the other thing is this whole concept of whether or not you can control your energy spend and whether it is controllable. And we like to, tell our teams that energy really is controllable, and we go about demonstrating how it can be controllable. So those, to me, tend to be the roadblocks that we run into or have run into in the past.
I don't think we've addressed this yet, but can you share, I don't know, maybe you're not comfortable, but can you share with people sort of the type of percentage savings that you guys have been achieving year after year since 2016 by undertaking this process?
Yeah, so I don't have the number. I've got a dollar figure in my head. I don't have a percentage savings. But so we got going in really in 2016. I think 2017 was really the first year that we started measuring. And in that first year, it would have been pretty much basically all on the procurement side, because we were just starting to get our energy teams going on I'll call it the energy efficiency side. And so the number I'm going to quote is for 17, 18, and 19. 20, 20 was a bit of an anomaly, as has 21, with what we're going through with the pandemic. But in those 3 years, the savings that we recorded would have been just under $4 million in savings, which is a considerable amount of money.
And certainly there's some greenhouse GHG savings associated with that as well. One thing, because in our previous podcast we talked about some of the activity you've had to do with these teams. Is there a business case, John, for an organization like yourself to keep at this, or is this tend to be like a 3-year project and you're done? What, from your experience, what's your sense of the validity of doing this on
Yeah,
an ongoing basis?
I definitely think you have those in any organization that believe it's, it's not sustainable. There isn't a business case. I truly believe there is, because if you take a look at the results we've achieved, and you have some people that talk about true cost savings compared to avoided costs. And if if one of our teams can, and I'm just going to throw out round numbers, but if one of our teams can implement something where they've reduced their consumption, say by 1,000 kilowatt hours, and if they maintain that, then that is a savings or an avoided cost year over year over year. And if energy pricing is rising, then they're year over year that avoided cost is actually increasing, right? They're saving even more by what they did 2 or 3 years ago. So I definitely, there's a case to be made, that a business case to be made, that this is something people should pursue.
So you brought up a couple of interesting items, John. One, the word cost avoidance, because accountants do not like that word.
No, they do not.
Not really.
And they haven't got a voucher for it. If
Yeah.
they haven't got a voucher for it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you, based on what you've described, how do you actually make a case internally using that information so you do get that buy-in within the organization? Can you share? Because we completely support what you're saying, but we know how challenging that can be for organizations to come to grips with that.
Yeah. So the way that we approached it is we actually demonstrated it, and we went down this road of the energy teams at the site, and it started with 11 sites that we piloted through the Energy Coach program, and where they all got training. They created a scorecard, they developed a baseline, they developed a plan, they acted on the plan, they reported out. And it was on the basis of that demonstration program with the sites, and they ended up staying in the program for 3 years, and then have transitioned into, I'll call it a homegrown program. But we were able to demonstrate it with those sites, that allowed us to expand it now from the 11 sites to 34 sites that have gone through the Energy Coach program. So that's how we did it. We got the support from an executive sponsor that fully backed what we were doing. It probably helped that individual had an accounting background and was very impressed with the dollar savings that we were seeing. And again, I remind you that we started down this path as a way to save money. That's how we started down, was we were looking to save money, become more competitive, and the pilot project demonstrated that, and we were allowed to expand it.
So I'm going to ask your opinion. There's a lot of organizations that feel the only way they're going to pursue management activity in energy is if there's incentives that are given to them. Can you share with us your experience? Has your success been incentive driven, meaning you've relied on utilities giving you money to do things, or what is actually, in fact, I will say to you, some organizations use that as a KPI of how successful they are because of how much money they collected from the utility or government. Yeah. So if you could share your opinion based on your experience.
Sure. We've definitely made use of incentive money as well. But my experience has shown that, and we've got there's a couple of great examples within our organization, that just the delay on, getting the funds approved or whatnot, if we would have just done the project when it got presented, right? If the AFE would have got approved, the savings we would have had in terms of, our reduction in consumption far outweighed any incentive money we were going to get. It ended up, actually, we spent more money by delaying and waiting than we ever recouped back from incentive money. So, the incentive money is great. It helps defer the cost, but I just think if it's worth doing, it's worth doing without the incentive money, because you're gonna end up getting those cost savings. So, if we're talking about, knocking 6 months or 7 months off of a payback analysis, I have found that in many of our cases, if we would have just done the project right when it was presented, we would have recouped all those savings and reduced consumption.
Well, typically incentives are based on capital projects, and you've talked about sort of the savings that you've achieved over the last few years. What would be your rough guess on the savings? Are they capital versus what we call no cost or low cost? What percentage breakdown do you think? Would just guess. I'm not. We won't hold it to you, but like, what would be your guess?
Yeah, that one you're putting me on the spot, because it definitely is not something that we have monitored. But if I had to guess, I would almost say it would be close to a 50-50 split. If you just take a look at what the sites did in terms of startup and shutdown procedures. Not all of our sites are running 24/7. A lot of them are running, maybe 5/24 or 5/16. And so they've got that weekend shutdown. And so one of the great things about, if you've got the data available to you, especially if you've got interval data, is being able to see what that load looks like during the weekend when everybody is supposed to have gone home and things were supposed to have been shut off. And so you can sort of see what that baseline is, and if the teams are monitoring it, they can come in and take a look at the data on Monday and say, hey, why is my load up 50 kilowatts or whatnot, and go back and investigate. And a lot of times they find out, the last person to leave the building on Friday night forgot to shut off something, or didn't follow the shutdown procedure. So I think with one of the things that we talk about in the Energy Coach program is this stoplight program, right, whereby they identify equipment that can be turned off at any time by anyone, sort of gets a green indicator, and then there's the yellow indicators that, yeah, this could be shut off, but only under certain conditions, and you better ask a foreman or somebody in the maintenance side. And then there's red, which is, don't touch. And so those types of startup and shutdown procedures, the stoplight, you get more into a sort of a cultural mindset, changing the culture, and those can be very, very powerful. When the teams report out to us and they don't talk about the stoplight program or implementing the stoplight program, we tend to, during the Q&A period, ask them, why haven't they done this? Or, what do they need to do to get this thing rolled out? Because we find that there's quite a bit of savings to be had there.
I wonder if I could bring one in here, and a slight change of tack. I mean, this podcast is intended for the manufacturing industry. And back when I had a proper job, before I got involved in energy and carbon, I was involved in quality management long time ago. And it struck me that there's a lot about the philosophy and the approach in quality that is actually can get echoed in energy management and carbon management. The fact that you mentioned earlier about, it's important to have a senior management champion, that you're looking at training, you're looking at a change of how things go, getting everybody involved. I wonder if you would agree with that, or whether you can expand on that as a view.
So I really believe that our team members need to have a continuous improvement mindset. And so, on the quality side of things, you're always talking about your CIAs, right? You always have to demonstrate your continuous improvement activities. And so the approach we take with energy management when we're talking to the teams is really, and is, I view energy management as a continuous improvement. So, plan, do, check, act.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
PDCA.
yes. So, if there's a graphic that I show that was shared with me, and I use this on a lot of the presentations that I do. I've done a couple of presentations for outside organizations, but also internally to our management committee, to our board, and even on what we call our monthly huddles. And it's really a circle with, sort of stops along the way, and it really does follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act motto, right? So you're gathering your data, you're engaging people, you're creating a plan, right? You're reviewing that plan and getting the endorsement, and then you're implementing the action plan. And now you're back to the beginning where you're gathering data or more data and evaluating that data to see how you take your next step around. So I find that very powerful, and that's how we try to approach it with the teams. This really is continuous improvement. It's just under the guise of energy management.
I think you've got a lot that's right in that. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about that. If you look at the energy management standard ISO 50001, it's effectively got a PDCA model within that, because part of the background was some of the thinking for 50001 came on the back of 9000, and in fact they all huddle together in a suite of what they refer to as management standards, which you may be aware now. Of course, they've all got a very similar back engine of how they operate and how they go together. So I think, yes, I've been a believer in this, that energy management's not something you do as a project. It's something you do as an ongoing integrated part of your business. And Dave and I have often used the expression, we're looking for energy management or carbon management in the corporate DNA.
One last question from me, John. So, and I can speak about this because I'm probably guilty of this. And John, Sandra, don't say anything because don't start nodding your head with agreement. But typically what happens is senior management, they get on something, they get on it, and then they move on to something else and they forget what they initially had. I think it happens often. They just hand it off to someone and they run with it. But when that happens, they actually forget, or they're not engaged in the previous endeavor that they wanted to focus on. And so you talked about your teams, and you talk about management. How do you keep management engaged and the teams engaged collectively? What can you share the process that you guys have done to sort of keep everyone engaged, so everyone understands the validity and value that this exercise brings to the organization?
Sure. So we actually did in a few different ways, and first and foremost, if we go back to the team approach that we've done, all of the teams were required on a regular basis, and it started off with the demonstration pilot with the 11 sites. We were doing it quarterly, and then as we brought in some of the other teams, it moved to semi-annual. But there's a report out that the teams have to do on camera. So we tend to use WebEx at Samuel. And so the teams are, so if we've got, as the program has grown, we've sort of had to subdivide our teams up, but we may have anywhere from 6 to 10 teams on the call. We try to have them on video, but then we've also got our senior leadership on the call as well, so that they are reporting out to the senior leadership group. And it might be, the divisional president for the division they work in. It could be the president of manufacturing. It could be our CEO. Colin has been participating in the last few presentations. So that's one way that we're able to keep everyone engaged. And we tend to get some pretty good questions from our senior leadership, especially follow-up questions from one particular individual that used to sit in the room with me and would be taking notes. And so when the next presentation came up, he was there with his notes and, asking for an update. If he didn't get an update in that presentation, he was asking, hey, what about this? You said this in the last presentation. How did that go? Right. And so that's great. It helps. It shows that to the teams that our leadership is engaged. And it also keeps the teams on their toes that, hey, we said we were going to do this. We're probably going to get questioned about it at the next presentation. So it acts as a really good motivator. So that's one way, Dave. A couple of other things is that our CEO holds a monthly huddle call where there's hundreds of employees on the call, and it's only 30 minutes, and so the topics that are discussed are usually 5 minutes in length, right? It's just a real quick snapshot, and we do use those to provide updates on energy management activities, as well as on our intranet, which is known as the Samuel Torch, because the torch is our symbol. We have an energy management page there, and so we are able to post different energy management activities. But in many cases, we have done a recording of the presentations by the teams, and so the intent is to have not only the presentations up there, the slide deck, but also selected recordings of different presentations. So that's how we sort of keep everybody informed and engaged.
It seems to me what John was saying, it's kind of in your company's DNA now. And what a wonderful opportunity for people in the plants that tend not to get exposure to the executive to present in front of the executive, and the executive can find future leaders. Plus, it's also kind of a walk around by management, because sometimes stuff gets buffered from senior management. Now the teams are talking directly to the executive manager. Seems like a win-win opportunity for both organizations, or both groups.
Actually, it has been kind of good, because some of the teams can actually question, hey, why wasn't that request for funds approved?
Yeah.
Right. And put that executive on the spot. So it's been interesting, and in some cases entertaining, to see the back and forth between the teams and the executives.
Interesting.
Thank you, John, for joining us on the podcast this week. Listening in on this conversation, there were many valuable tidbits for our listeners getting started or maintaining their energy and carbon plan. So again, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome, and it was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, John.
Any final words, Dave and John?
Well, I think if our listeners, when they listen to this, they'll find out that energy is controllable. And I think John shared some of the processes that he has learned to use within the organization. So I think there's some real gold nuggets, John, that you've shared with people. So thank you for participating and joining us today.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I would just add, I think the message you get is make energy management part of your business.
Yep, agreed. Well, thank you for an excellent episode. Talk to you all soon. That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.